I thought it's so great out here, but it's sad that sometimes the geography can maybe limit the experiences that young people are having.
Meet the enthusiastic and passionate Jane Vaughan, co-founder, co-director and employee of Big Sky Stories, a community-based organisation in Broken Hill which wants to give children in the far west of New South Wales a love of stories and reading. She is today's guest on A Home in the Outback, a podcast about people living, working and creating in the far west. I'm your host, Catherine Waite. Jane chose to move to Broken Hill about 15 years ago after finishing her university teaching degree in Sydney. Living in the city was not her cup of tea, so she opened the street directory in her car one day and decided Broken Hill was pretty west. She moved here without a job, but word soon got around town a teacher was here and she had a job at Railway Town Public School. Around 2010, Jane started seeing new models of engaging children in creative writing open up in the cities and thought it was an exciting way to engage children in a rapidly changing world. But there were no opportunities in the far west. She sat on the idea for 10 years before deciding to do something about it, and in 2022, Big Sky Stories began with a physical space in Argent Street in Broken Hill. Jane, thank you so much for your time. We are in your beautiful Big Sky Stories store at the moment. Do you call it a store?
It's hard to know. Some people call it the bookshop. Some people call it a play space. I tend to try and refer to it as just our community space, which involves a few different elements. So, but it's lovely to have you, and thank you for coming and inviting me.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a lot about Big Sky Stories, but before we do, you're born and bred Broken Hill, or are you from away?
I am very from away. I would not want to offend anybody from Broken Hill. I have been here almost very close to 15 years. So I've been here for quite a while, but still I know I'm a C grader and that's okay. I primarily grew up, we moved around a little bit the first few years of my life, but from about 6, 7, we were in Orange in the Central West, and that's where I call my other home when I go home to visit family. But I then went to uni in Sydney after I'd finished school after a couple of years, and then moved straight out to Broken Hill. So this is the longest I've ever lived in one place, is in Broken Hill. So it does very much feel like my home now.
What brought you to Broken Hill?
I came to Broken Hill to teach. I'm a primary school teacher by training, and the Department of Education came to university one day and were trying to encourage us all as we were finishing our final year to go and teach in Western Sydney, because there was very much a need for teachers in Western Sydney. And I had spent the 4 years of being at uni, but then every once a month driving over the Blue Mountains to visit family in Orange. And the city was great, but it's not my cup of tea long term. The intensity and so many people, that's not where I feel the most calm. And so I knew I wanted to not stay in Sydney, and I wanted to go somewhere over the Blue Mountains again. But I came because I opened the street directory in my car at the car park at uni, and there was a state map, because we still had street directories in our cars at that point. And I went, Broken Hill, that's pretty west. I've never been there before. And I didn't say anything to anybody for a few months, and I sat on it and just kind of contemplated how I felt about that. I mentioned it then to my mum, and she was really excited about it. They'd been here on a holiday, and she said, I don't know why I didn't think to suggest that to you. I think you'd really enjoy it out there, and it was a pretty cool place, and they were happy to support me wherever I went. And then, I started contacting schools, and there was no official permanent jobs at the time to apply for, but they all said that there was a lot of casual work and temporary work, and the phrasing was, and if you worth your salt, you'll keep getting a job. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a crack. And then weirdly, a very close friend of mine, who was also in Sydney, got engaged and was marrying a person who was going to be a pilot with the Royal Flying Doctors out here. So she was moving out. She was quite scared, going, I'm going to go to Broken Hill. And I said, well, I'm already going to go there as well. So anyway, we ended up coming kind of 6 months apart from each other. But I came to teach, And I thought I would really just be here for a couple of years, not because I didn't like it, but I thought, it's pretty far away. I'll see how I go, stay a few years, and then I might go somewhere else, because teaching is a great skill that can let you kind of travel and move about if that's what you're interested in. But here we are, basically 15 years later. And when I came to town and I first got a job, the first principal that I had, who's only just very recently retired, he said, "It's funny with Broken Hill, you either come and you teach for a couple of years and then you move on, or 25 years later you're still here." And I said, "What are you?" And he said, "It'll be 23 years next year." So, and he's still here, and his grandchildren are now at school in Broken Hill. So it's funny. I think some people, it kind of gets under your skin and you can just appreciate what a great community it is, and you just want to stay.
So what school did you go and teach at?
Yes, so I didn't have an official job, so I had come and I was going to do some casual teaching and try and sort of find something. The day after I arrived in town, I got a call from a principal to say, "I've heard you're here," which was a little bit creepy, but that's how small the teaching world is in Broken Hill. So he'd heard I'd come to town through another casual teacher, and he said, "Can you come and talk to me right now?" So I stopped trying to buy a fridge for the rental that I was moving into, and I went up to the school. I went to Railway Town Public School, best in the West, woo! And yeah, we had a lovely chat, and he showed me around the school, and he was really lovely. And he said, "I think that I would like to give you an opportunity to jump in to a school." And I think it was very lovely actually at the time. He said, "I think I want to be the person that says, I gave Jane a job." And that has always stuck with me, because I think for someone who did not know me at all, that was a very kind thing to say. And he was encouraged that I'd kind of just been brave enough to come and move away from family and friends really and give it a crack. So I went into a maternity position to start with in the library, and then I moved on to class for a number of years, and then I spent about 7 years in the library at Railway Town and then here we are.
What grades did you teach?
I taught my first class officially the second year out. I taught my grade 3 and 4, so stage 2, and I really love that age group. It's a really nice, sweet spot where everybody's pretty independent at that point. They can do a lot of things, but also they just are excited for fun learning. The hormones haven't quite kicked in yet. There's a lot of enthusiasm. You can kind of G them up a little bit, and it was a really lovely time. I think I taught stage 2 for about 4 years, and then I went to year 1 and year 2 for a few years, and I also really enjoyed that down there, getting into that early literacy phase. But then moving to the library, it was wonderful because I actually was able to teach the entire school across a week. So I had everybody for at least 2 hours, and then I also spent a number of years teaching half of my week in the support class at the school. So kind of team teaching alongside the key teachers of that class, but working with the kids who perhaps had some extra things going on. And that taught me a huge amount, being able to teach in that class in particular, and working with students that are really having to learn differently, work things out in the world for themselves in a really wide variety of ways, and navigate also the social aspect of school. And I think to be able to stop and to slow down and really reflect on the way that you teach to make it most effective for every single person in a class. I think teaching in support classes and with children who have extra learning requirements is something that every teacher should do, and it makes you a better teacher. So, yeah.
And what did you do as a library teacher?
So as a library teacher, part of my time was to teach subjects like science or sometimes history, a bit of technology, but primarily I wanted that role in the library to be an opportunity to grow a love of reading and a reading culture within the school. So there's a little bit of freedom in the library in that you can introduce different authors and genres. There isn't as detailed a curriculum. There's still a curriculum, but there's a little bit more freedom for you to go down this avenue, or if there's interest from the children, you can go down this avenue and still teach the parameters that you need to teach. And so a big part of the job was also giving the library a good clean out and a flush out, and we got rid of some older things that didn't need to be there, not the classics, but the things that were not necessary to be there anymore. We cleaned out the teacher resources and moved them to another space in the school. And the goal was that we made that space feel like it was about the children, and it was about being able to find a joy in reading, and that everybody would find a book. And I spent quite a bit of time actually rearranging the system, not in the non-fictions, but the fictions. We took them out of the Dewey Decimal System, and I actually put them into a genred system so that there was greater independence, so that when students came in, whether that was class time or at at lunchtime, that they would be able to walk in and instinctively be able to find the books that they were interested in, and not lose time getting stuck, trying to find something, giving up, getting bored, and then it turning into, a behavior situation, but actually being able to walk in and them have the confidence to say, I love books about dinosaurs and I know where they are, and I'm going to get them, and I'm going to sit down and delve into that. And so, yes. And then the other favorite part in terms of in the library, but it started in the stage 2 and the stage 1 classrooms, but really being able to take time every single day to stop and to read aloud to children, which I think is ultimately one of the best things any of us can ever do with children. But in a classroom setting, it's one of my most favorite memories, is to be able to sit with a group and to take them through a whole story from the beginning to end, whether it's a great picture book or whether it's an excellent chapter book, something that they wouldn't necessarily pick up themselves, something that's not necessarily their favorite genre, but for you to take them through it and get to the other side, and to have them, when you close the book that day, them go, no, just read a bit more, and you know that you've got them, and then you wait for the next day, and then they're all ready and they're all there. And I think it's a lovely thing, because as a class and in teaching, we have so many children coming from so many backgrounds and experiences, and the things just even of that morning that they've experienced that they bring into the classroom. Everybody has something different, but when you sit down and you share one story, one book together, you all go on that journey together. So it's this beautiful unifying experience for the entire class, and you feel the things the character feels. There's the highs, there's the lows, there's the stress points, there's the disappointments, but you've all done it together. And so it's a really easy way to just bond a group of people as well, and to sit back and go, that story will stick with all of us because of, did we like it, did we not like it, how did we feel when it ended, was there more that we didn't get, all of those things. So that was probably one of my favorite things, is really having the freedom in the library to go, we are going to read as many books as we can, and and no one could stop us at that point. So yeah.
You obviously have a love for literature. Was that something that was really instilled in you as a child? What are some of your favourite books as a child?
Oh, it's so hard to choose favourite books. I definitely had people around me. My family read. My dad is a really keen reader. He reads a lot of autobiographies. My mum has become a reader later in life, but was always a great lover of the radio. And I think from her, I saw somebody who loves stories of other people. So listening to people's stories, listening to historical narratives was something I saw in her a lot. But it's interesting because now she has very much delved back into reading, perhaps now that all of the children are grown up and maybe she has a bit more time to do the reading. But we were always encouraged to read and expected to read. We also had things like audiobooks a lot. I remember falling asleep when I was about 12 or 13. I would always put a cassette tape on because, we didn't have MP3 players at that point. But I remember distinctively listening to Wuthering Heights and, some of those passages, really staying with me. I think one of my most favourite books as a child was The Chronicles of Narnia. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is a particular favourite of mine. And I'm not a huge fantasy reader at all, but that for me trod this lovely line between the realness of the characters and what they were experiencing before they stepped into Narnia and out of Narnia, but also this idea that there was this magical world, but that it also mirrored the world. And I think I could see in Narnia how story and real life can help and reflect each other. When you read a book, you learn about yourself, but you also learn about other people by learning from the characters and through their experiences that you might not have, but it challenges you to think. And I think Lucy in particular in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, there was something about Lucy that I very much resonated with as a child. But also I loved, when I was, in terms of picture books, I loved I loved books that rhymed. I loved, there's some older books called Bottlesnakes and Gumballs, and I loved those books. They're about, they're by S.A. Wakefield, and they're about these made-up creatures that live in the Australian bush, and the bottlesnakes are these grumpy old spiky kinds of things, and they're always trying to catch the gumballs, and the gumballs can squish into any size container, and they make funny noises, and it was just this hilarious kind of to and fro of good and bad, but set in the Australian bush, so it felt very nice and familiar as well. But picture books, I really enjoyed. I think I really stuck books like Princess Smarty Pants. I don't know if you remember that one. Princess Smarty Pants, which is ultimately a small picture book of the feminist ideals in terms of girls don't need boys, and they can get on, they can do things for themselves. They don't need someone to come and rescue them and sweep them off their feet. And I just thought that was kind of cool. Where the Wild Things Are, some of those classics that, I still just remember. They were there on the shelf. I think another favourite that I have a strong memory of is The Jolly Postman. And that was a book that someone close to us, a family friend, gave to us. And it stayed on the higher shelf in our lounge room, and it was the shelf where I couldn't get the book down, and Mum had to get it down for us because it has all of the lovely pockets with the letters on each page. And so the great fear is that you would lose the letter and then the story wouldn't make sense, and so we'd have to read that one with Mum or under supervision so that she made sure all the letters went back in and then it could go on the shelf. So there's a lot. I went through a big phase, perhaps as a teenager as well, where I really enjoyed, I think I read a lot of Jackie French, but historical fiction, that's kind of where I've landed as a reader. I really enjoy, not necessarily autobiographies or biographies, but historical fiction where, again, I think you can look back on a past real life experience and try to learn from that and learn from how people have made choices, what they've pushed against, what they've strived for. And I think part of what I like about historical fiction is that it makes me really grateful for the time that I do live in. There are a lot of really hard things about the world all the time, but I look back and I think, gosh, I'm glad I didn't live through the potato famine that the Irish did, or gosh, I'm really grateful that I didn't live through the deepest, darkest parts of the stolen generation, for instance. But I think reading back on those things is so important because you then have less excuses to let those things happen in the future. So I think that's what I really like about historical fiction.
So going back to your time at teaching,
yes,
you're there for 12 years at Railway Town, but at some point you've had this idea of Big Sky Stories. So
yes,
what is Big Sky Stories, and why did you start it?
It's a great question. I think the concept, it wasn't called Big Sky Stories until, the crux point of needing to decide what we were going to call it. But the idea that it would be amazing to create a space that was focused on literacy, literature, a love of reading, but was also slightly different from a library concept, came from perhaps seeing in about 2010 the Sydney Story Factory opened in Sydney, and there are another couple of similar models. The first one that started there was one that started in the States that kind of prompted the Sydney Story Factory, and there's another couple that are down in Melbourne, and I think there might even be another sort of version of that in Brisbane now as well. And hearing and experiencing what those places were able to offer children who were also from perhaps a disadvantaged background. There was a bit of a focus there, but primarily they were also about writing, creative writing, and they were doing workshops and they were bringing children in and they were trying to take away perhaps some of the stickiness and the heaviness that the curriculum can sometimes give, and they really wanted to build up, I think, the idea of voice, and that children from all backgrounds, we want them to be represented in writing. So those models were primarily based on creative writing, but I think what I could see was that it was so exciting and it was so different, and it really challenged the idea of the traditional school system, which is quite a product of the Industrial Revolution. And I think the more time you spend with children and you see how quickly the world is changing for them. Even just the fact that we don't have street directories in our cars anymore, but 15 years ago, that's what I was using to get around. So the world is changing really quickly, but we're not necessarily adjusting our education system at the same pace. And so these models were really exciting to me because I thought that's different. That's thinking outside the square, and it's trying to bring back the joy and the love and the freshness. It's not just about data collection, and it's not just trying to tick people off a skills list. It's trying to build in a love for, not necessarily that everyone will become a published writer, but that they have voice and that they have things to say. Because when you know that you have a voice that's worth listening to, you can stand up to the bully in the playground, or you can stand up for that person who needs assistance, or you can say, you know what, I've got skills and I'm going to go and use them for someone else. So I think those things, they're very big and conceptual, but I think ultimately I also thought, this is great, but they're all set up in urban places. And I was living out in Broken Hill, and I love it out here. I love the fact that I can drive 2 minutes out of town and I can feel like I'm the only person in the whole wide world. Or every day you can't have anything but a cracker of a sunset and a sunrise, and that there's space to think and to breathe. And this landscape is amazing. And I thought it's so great out here, but it's sad that sometimes the geography can maybe limit the experiences that young people are having. And so this idea brewed, and I guess it sat there for a good 10 years. And I thought, it's too hard. But I didn't want it to just be the same as that. I knew that part of it needed to include books and an opportunity for books to be going into people's homes and to build reader ownership. And I think it also was really compelled, especially once I was in the library, and just those everyday interactions of children and them talking about how even some of them weren't allowed to borrow books because they were worried that it would get lost at home and then it wouldn't come back, and then they wouldn't be allowed to borrow anymore. So it was just easier to leave it alone and not do it. Or children just didn't see themselves as readers, or they would say, no one at home reads with me, or it's too hard, or they would just get really stuck on, these are the easy books, but they weren't willing to go into something challenging. And I think I kept seeing in the small pocket that I was experiencing that perhaps there was a bigger need for something that would really push the young people in the far west towards being children who saw themselves as readers and loved reading and wanted to do that with their own children and have their parents be excited about it, and not because I think everybody has to read War and Peace at some point. I haven't read War and Peace. I don't intend to. But just that it's an avenue when other things are really hard in life. It's a wonderful avenue to stop and to read a book and to kind of let those things go for a time. Or it's lovely to be able to read a book and share that moment, even if it's for 5 minutes, between you and someone that loves you and cares about you, for you to again delve into that story and experience it together like we did as a class where we went on this journey together. You can do that with your mum or your dad or your pop or your nan or an aunt or an uncle. And there's something just quite, I think, sacred about that space and what happens in there when you share that story and you can bond together. And so Big Sky Stories that's a long-winded answer to say that Big Sky Stories, I wanted it to be a space where a lot of those things were allowed to happen. There was space for books, there was space to talk about books, there was space to encourage writing and expression and to delve into the different facets of what literature and stories can be. Also, I've always been a keen believer that the creative arts is a really important part of how we learn and grow, and that is something that's not very easily enacted in the public school system, or any school system, but it kind of gets a bit pushed out by more rote practice. And we learn best when we learn in our bodies. So things like drama, things like getting up and moving around and not just telling a story with our words, but telling a story with our bodies, or becoming a character and embodying that experience to some degree helps the depth of reading and learning develop. And so wanting to be able to kind of do more of that and have more freedom to do that. So yeah, Big Sky Stories, we are, in a nutshell, we're a not-for-profit. We're a registered charity, and we're based on an idea called a social enterprise, where the goal is that we make enough money to keep ourselves going and to pay the bills, but ultimately we want the finances to go back into our social purpose. And that social purpose is to encourage, enable and equip young people, children, families in the far west of New South Wales to develop a love and joy of reading through creative arts experiences and through quality literature. Yeah. So
I want to go back. It's really inspiring actually hearing you talk and your passion. I'm a mum of 2 young boys, a 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. So it's really encouraging to hear someone like you is really invested in the next generation. Just to go back a bit, the word industrial, when you're talking about the school system currently, kind of stood out to me. Can you just unpack that a little bit? Because you're stepping out of the school system with this enterprise. So why does this model not work in schools or can't work in schools?
I think this model isn't about at all. It's not about wanting to. It's not about saying that all of that system is wrong. It's about saying how can we make sure and encourage that these things keep happening in schools, because I do think at some point our school system is going to have a big twist and a shake-up. The industrial aspect being that, the Industrial Revolution was about streamlining things, creating slick processes, people not having to do necessarily quite so many of the jobs because machinery was more efficient, but also that things would be produced in a way that was very the same. So, you can make 400 rubber ducks because they come through the machine and the machine is the same and the mold is the same. And I think our school system is based on that industrial model where everybody comes, they're all in the room, they have this, they all, read from the same book, do the same things, do the same assessments, and out the other end, they should come out able to do A, B, C, D, and E. And when you're making rubber ducks, that works because you're using rubber, and most consistently rubber is the same, and the yellow dye is the same, or the orange paint is the same. But people are not the same as that. And children come to school with so many different experiences and backgrounds. They come possibly from being born prematurely, and so therefore having physical needs that they've had to adjust to over time. They come with family situations that are wide and varied. They may not live with blood relatives, they may have been in the foster system for a number of years and so haven't had necessarily the same kind of stability as another child. We have families that are going through processes of stress, whether that be from angst or separation, or even through grief and mourning. We have siblings who come to school and they are ultimately sometimes the carers for younger siblings, because we have parents and carers who work multiple jobs because the cost of living is so much. We have children who haven't necessarily had dinner the night before, again, because of different circumstances. We have children who are neurodivergent, who learn in so many different ways that we now understand the brain is capable of. So when we come at learning with just a systematic approach of we do this, we tick all these boxes, everybody will come out able to do these things at the other end. I just think that doesn't match what children are. And it's a tricky balance, because in education, we're taught to really know and understand and acknowledge the differences that come into the classroom. But sometimes, not because people don't care, but just because sometimes systems don't have very much flexibility in them. It's very hard to necessarily adapt as easily everything that would be helpful for everybody. So whether that's because you might need another set of hands in the classroom because there's 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 people in the particular who need a bit more time, or who need someone to work with them one step at a time because auditory processing is an issue for them, and so they can't go at the same speed as 5 other people. Or you've got this person over here who is feeling really upset that day because a lot of things have legitimately happened to them, and you kind of have to care for them but also keep everybody learning. And it feels a lot like juggling a lot of balls all of the time, and there's a lot of expectation in terms of what you'll be able to get through in the classroom experience. But also what you want to try and do is care for these lovely little people that are in the room, and they're all really different, and you're trying to bond them together as a group. You're trying to help them care for each other, but you're also trying to know them well enough and where they're all at in a wide variety of skills to be able to help them just take the next step forward. And so Big Sky Stories is not about trying to say everything about school is awful and bad. I love so many things about my school experience as a student and also as a teacher, and I miss lots of those things. But I also think that as a society, a part of what we've done is say learning is the job of a school, and when they get to school, children will learn how to do this and this. And I think that has also come from creating a bit of a, social, cultural atmosphere where we have a lot of expectations about how we want to live, and we want to have fun lives, busy lives. We want to have enough of the things. We want to experience a lot of things, but also there are stresses like finances, like family situations, like emotional things going on. And there's so much going on that actually it's easier in many ways to just go, you know what, I'm going to put learning on the plate of school. And Big Sky Stories really wants to say that school is there, but also the research that we now have and understand is that we know that 90% of the brain develops by the time you are 3, 4, and ultimately by 5. So when you start your formal school experience at a primary school level, at least, not talking about early childhood, but at that kindergarten level, so much of that development has already formed that if you're not ready for that systematic outlay of learning and instruction and if emotionally and socially you're not ready for being in a larger group of people and following lots of instructions and having really big, long days, then it can really quickly become quite overwhelming. And once you start to fall a little bit behind in what people deem as the markers that you should meet at certain points, then it can be really, really hard to catch up, just because when you're talking about a school, you're talking about a lot of people and less intensity in terms of one-on-one support. So the goal of Big Sky Stories is that we really enable families in that role of a first teacher. And we say, you guys can do this. How can we help you do it? Let us support you in doing that, whether it's providing space for you to come and just have a bit of a breather, or it's space because you want to talk about what that might look like, whether it's helping you just to understand how the brain works and how language develops, because for lots of people, it's not a conversation that we have every day. And when you know more things, you can do more things. And so there's an educational aspect to it, but also I think sometimes it's just about encouraging people and saying, I'm excited about it and I want you to be excited about it, and I want you to enjoy it. I don't want you to read. If you don't like reading that book with that little person, stop reading with it. I want you to enjoy it as much as that little person is enjoying it, even though you're horribly tired, even though you've had to do 5 loads of washing in a day, all of those things. But also not to put pressure on people to say, you suddenly just have to get them there, but knowing that every piece of that early development puzzle that we invest into will have such a great long-term benefit. If we can encourage people and support people in that, I think we can see huge strides made for our young people once they start experiencing a more formal school experience.
I'm nodding my head because I'm thinking about, like, as a parent,
yes,
reading books to my sons,
yes,
and I'm just like, oh, do we have to read that book again? Can we read another book?
Yes.
I'm so sick of reading
yes.
Bluey Fruit Bat's book. I really am.
That's right. And let's be honest, Bluey was made as a television visual entertainment experience. Bluey was not written to be delightful literature format. So, but I think that's the other thing. I think part of what's hard is helping people understand that we've perhaps maybe unknowingly created rules about what reading looks like for children. You know, to be honest, when they're 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, ultimately, most of the time, they still don't know what those actual words are on the page. So you know what? Tell a different story. Like, who said you just have to read the words on the page? Like, why not be like, and then all of a sudden, Bluey decided they weren't going on a picnic, but they were going to climb a volcanic mountain, and off they, like, add to the story, you know, turn it into something.
Why is that important?
It's important because it's about creativity, and story is about being creative. It's about telling things that are truthful experiences, but it's also about imagining and inventing, and that's what stories will do for you as well. Stories, you know, reading stories, listening to stories, whether that's, you know, because you're a grown up and you like listening to a podcast that's like a crime thriller, part of it is about going on the journey and the tension and the build up, you know, whether you like listening to the story of, you know, the gardener who's been working on these rose bushes for 25 years and they have narrowed down the perfect way to get the best blooms. All of that is about other people's experiences and how that mirrors in and reflects on ourselves. And so changing the story shows children as well that you can be creative with it. Like, it's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to feel awful. So if it feels awful for you as the grown-up, change the way you're doing it. And not as in it always has to be the voices, but voices and mucking around with voices can be a pretty fun way to make it different. Or engaging them in the story as well, so that you're sometimes doing less of the work. Like, stop at the end. If you've read that book a lot, they will know that story. So stop telling them the story and ask them to tell you the story, because a huge part of what we want to say at Big Sky Stories as well is to encourage young people to do more speaking, to get children talking more and more, because that oral speech will lead to a better understanding of how sounds work and how sounds play together. Therefore, how books work, how reading works, because that's just sounds in a, you know, letter format, and then we can piece those things together, and then we've got sentences, you know, and then you can get into that at school, that all of that decoding process. But to play with it is to also show them that it's fun, you know, to sing the Five Little Ducks song, but when you've sung it 400 times, turn it into the 5 little diggers went out one day and that foreman called them back and only 4 came back. Do you know what I mean? Or it wasn't Little Red Riding Hood, it was Little Red Brontosaurus, and that Brontosaurus went off and it met a T-Rex in the forest. And you can just, yeah, it's not about having to follow a script, but that script is also there if you're not sure what to say. So if you don't feel confident as a grown-up in telling stories because it's not something you experienced, let the author and the illustrator that have worked really hard to skill themselves in that way, let them give that to you, and you use that and share that with that little person. But don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid to make it up on your own, or stop at the last word on every sentence, and you'll be surprised how often that 3-year-old will chip in and say, I know what it is. And especially if it's a great rhyming or a book with some rhythm in it, that receptive language that they've been listening to, it is there and it's ready to start bursting out. So as soon as they're starting to express more, you pull back a little bit and let them go for it, and encourage them and ask them what they think's happening in the story, or point to the picture and ask them how they think the character's feeling. And even if you don't actually read the story, but you just use it as a prompt to get them talking more, that will do and does a huge amount for their language development.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking sometimes when I read books and the boys are flipping over the pages
yes.
and going ahead or going back, and it's so frustrating as a parent.
It is, because they're not following the system. But we don't want to push them into a system. We want them to push them into a rich, deep, wonderful, creative experience of storytelling and that idea of journeying through. So read the book in the order that they turn the pages.
Okay.
It's because for them it's more about experiencing the sounds and the words and that exposure to all that vocabulary and the playfulness of it. And yeah, we don't have to feel like everything just has to go from A to B. And you might be surprised how much more you enjoy it. And also, when we're very little, essentially our attention span is equivalent to about our age. So when you're 1, you've got about 1 minute, and most stories take a bit more than a minute. But if you get a minute in and they put it down and they want to pick another one, put it down and pick another one. Like it doesn't have to be, no, we will get to the end of the book, like, no, I don't know very many people that pick up Lord of the Rings and just go from beginning to end. Like, so we've put these unconscious kind of rules around it, and we don't need to do that. You can play with it. You can just, even if you literally don't read it and you say, what can you see on this page? Get them to talk about what they can see. What do you think this page sounds like? That's a great question to ask young children, like whether you're reading a dinosaur book or something about the ocean, ask them if they could hear this page, what would it sound like? And sometimes you'll get a lot of very unexpected answers. And at some point, apparently every character in the book will be making a fart sound. But ultimately, they're putting their ideas into story, and they're starting to see and identify themselves also as storytellers. So not just consumers of stories, but also people who have something to say,
so
and something
creators.
to being creators. That's right. And having something to put out there into the world. And that's what you want to encourage as well. Not just that you have to follow the system and follow the rules, but you can do something different and,
not constantly consuming.
Yes.
The people who create and
Yes.
imagine. And I
Absolutely.
guess so maybe that's tapping into that culture that we live in as consumers of media and content
Yep.
and information
Yes.
and knowledge.
Yes.
And do you think as parents, maybe a little bit of my own experience is feeling confident to be able to teach your kids and that you know
Absolutely.
what you're doing? And
Absolutely. That's right. And you may have had, that can be a lot of it may be that also you didn't grow up in an experience where books or reading or storytelling or that kind of talk between, sometimes you might have been the children that was to be seen but not heard. And so you didn't have that kind of relationship with family members, or you didn't have the resources available in your house, that maybe there weren't books because money was spent on other things that were deep necessities. Also, you might have had, sadly, many people have had a pretty sometimes unpleasant schooling experience. And so anything kind of connected to that feels really uncomfortable and brings back really negative memories. And so, of course, you might want to avoid that or keep that at arm's length. And I think another aspect of Big Sky Stories, that encouraging and enabling and equipping aspect, it's to do it for children, but it's really to do it for grown-ups. I would love to sit down with every kid in the Far West and read with them all of the time, but that is impossible as one human being to do that. But the people who live with them in their households, if we can encourage that little fire of doing that as much as not for 4 hours every day, but even if it's one book every day, or even if it's 5 minutes every day, it makes a difference. We know that the more exposure you have to words, and whether that's through talking or playing, that counts as well. But stories are, as I said, they're one of those easier ways where it's just there, it's happening, you're doing it, you're exposing them to words that they aren't necessarily using themselves yet, but when they're ready to, you've added to that bank of knowledge.
what are the statistics when it comes to literacy in the Far West?
Yeah, so I think one of the key statistics is that the ADC data from 2021, which is essentially the early development childhood data that's gathered for the Far West in one particular area in terms of language and cognition. So, receptive language, expressive language, that process of thinking, that's what cognition is, thinking, joining ideas together. In 2021, the Far West, the 5-year-olds that were assessed were at 31.1% at risk or vulnerable in their language and cognition. And to put data is helpful when you compare it to other things. The rest of New South Wales in the same assessment at that same year was at 15% in terms of those that were vulnerable or at risk. And so that is more than twice the state average for children in the Far West being at risk. And that's a huge amount. That's a third of children at a critical phase where 90% of their brain development is kind of locking into place as a foundation, that they're not ready to kind of tackle the things that are really going to be coming at them in that more formal schooling system. And so they're starting quite a bit behind. Not everybody, but a good chunk of little people are starting behind, and it's only they'll still keep moving forward and they'll still keep learning. But if you're already a year or two behind, you'll keep being a year or two behind. You'll keep moving forward, but others will be moving forward ahead of you. And when you're 10 and when you're 11 and when you're 12 and you can't do the things that some other people can do, that starts to really impact you emotionally and socially. And we know that going into high school and teenage years, we become so scared and worried about what people think of us. And so if we're not confident or capable in our everyday learning circumstances, it's easy to also run away from those things and avoid them more, or push them to the side, or do something else so that you don't have to feel silly that you can't read as well as you thought, or you can't answer that question as best you might be able to compared to others. It's complicated, and
you're really trying to change a generation.
Yes.
And that's huge.
That's big.
And you're doing it here in the Far West.
Yes.
And, I just think for someone who's been here for 15 years, you're really setting yourself a task to be here for the rest of your life.
I am. Yeah.
And that's big.
It is big.
You must really love this place.
I do really love it. It's been a community that has really welcomed me. I have lots of wonderful friends here, and people who also have been very close friends and will remain close friends, but also people who have also moved on from here as well. I think the transience of some aspects of Broken Hill in the Far West is a tricky thing to balance as well. But I've also had people care about me and invest in me, and I think in a community, that's what you want, and when you experience that for yourself, I think it naturally it builds a natural want for you to do that for the others around you. And so I also want to say it's a big task, and it's definitely not something that I can do by myself, nor at any point up until now I have done by myself. It's been a very big team effort.
Yes, but let's talk about the team.
Yes, but can I also say that so in terms of doing this, it's not something that I think I can do, but if I can just keep going on about it, and everybody else in our community, if there's a ripple effect, and if more and more and more of us are talking to each other about it, and doing it with our children, doing it with the children that visit our houses, talking to our cousins about it, and if it becomes something that as a community we're doing, actually, then we can do something. When our community cares enough about something, I've seen our community do great. When we care about the footy final, you can't, where everybody stands, and people they will be there, they will cheer, they will shout. When we care about something as a community, everybody knows about it. So I would like to just kind of keep talking about this until our community, because I know that we care about it. We care about our kids having the best opportunities as possible. But if we do the work as a community, we can change it, and we can shift it, and we cannot have 31.1% of our kids not quite ready and at risk in really falling behind in their language and cognition. So yes, it's a team.
No, that was really good to hear, because it is going to involve community participation,
absolutely,
locally, more broadly.
That's right. In every household, that's the goal. Yeah.
Talk to me about the structure of Big Sky Stories. There's like a board that you've got. Mm-hmm. Who's on the board? How does it work? Sure.
We have a group of 3 directors. So Dr. Robin Ewing and Mary Pilkington, who's also a primary school teacher, who's been in Broken Hill for about 8-9 years now. But is also heavily early childhood trained, and that's her primary experience, as well as in learning support. And then myself as a primary school teacher. So the 3 of us are the 3 co-directors of Big Sky Stories. So primarily between the three of us, we make decisions, we oversee how operations should go, which direction we should go in, what things we should invest time and effort into. We also, in our various aspects, connect with different people that we can partner with and support to continue the goals and aims of Big Sky Stories. We also have an advisory group which has about half a dozen locally based people in it that we try to gather together at least once a term, in person or on Zoom, to kind of recap where we've been, to listen to their experiences in the community from a slightly more outside experience, whether that be as a parent or whether somebody connected to health or education. So that's a bit of a mixture of people, and we would like that to continue to grow in mixture and experience as well. But we care about understanding how other people are experiencing Big Sky Stories, because when you're inside something and you know it's the thing that you care about and you think about the most, it can also not necessarily communicate that way. So we have the advisory board. We also try to get feedback from people who participate in workshops, for instance, or learning experiences that we do here or perhaps in schools, to kind of gauge their feedback, not just what their experience was, but was it helpful? Would they like more of those things? Was it boring? And did we miss the mark? So structurally, in terms of that operation, we have one full-time employee, which is myself, and Mary and Robin come and participate but are not paid. They are just directors, but they come and they either lead groups or workshops, or they participate in just some of the functional things every day. Oh, sorry, not every day, but when they're able to. And we've just been able to start somebody on a part-time basis in the space of Big Sky Stories, in more of a junior learning role that will allow me to have some more freedom to go out into the community, because I think it's really important to say that Big Sky Stories is a space for anyone and everyone who wants to come and be in a place where they can imagine and create and play and read and talk and grow. But also, we want the goals of Big Sky Stories is to spend a lot of time out in the community as well, and Broken Hill, but also further afield. So hoping that this year we'll be able to spend some more time out in Menindee, for instance, go up to Tibooburra, anywhere that will have us and that we can get to. That's where we would like to go, to not just expect children to come here, but for us to be able to connect with more families in other spaces, because there are a huge number of people in our community that very rarely come to Argent Street, and that's totally fine and okay. So being able to go and do work at schools or work in playgroups and work alongside other groups and organisations that exist as well, that's a big part of what we want to do. So
my last question I wanted to ask was, what's the vision 10 years down the track? Where do you want to be?
Look, so many things. I would love 10 years down the track for us to be, one aspect would be producing regularly stories in the form of books that were created in collaboration with local children and local storytellers and artists, so that at least once a year we were producing something that helped young people connect with the stories of this place, but also helped visitors to the Far West to connect with stories from this place. We have a lot of people who have written wonderful books about the history and stories of Broken Hill and the Far West, but they are primarily more easily accessible for, young adults and adults and grown-ups. So to have more picture books that young people have been a part of producing to tell their stories and to learn about their place. I would love for us to be very regularly travelling going out to all of the communities further afield in the Far West, whether that to be to go and do some drama literacy work, or whether that be to go and show with them and share with them some of the best new wonderful stories that are out there, and to give them a chance to touch and feel and choose and decide for themselves what books they want to own and delve into, because it's really hard to buy a book that you can't kind of peek inside of, and that tangible experience of the book we want to share. We'd love to have people who have skills and experiences within the Far West in terms of the creative arts. We'd love to have more opportunity for young people to connect with learning from local knowledge as well. You know, back in the day when everyone used to know Rick the stonemason down the road, or Bob the boilermaker further up the road, and you could take your bike up there and you could learn how to fix that. I think there's such an opportunity with so many skills and experiences that we could share with the younger generation, that perhaps we don't necessarily have many opportunities to create that space for them to exist together. So if Big Sky Stories can be a conduit for kind of bringing generations together to share knowledge and stories, we would want to do that. I think also a big part of it is getting more books out there. So book ownership is a really big part of, statistically what we know makes a difference. Even owning 10 to 15 books has a huge impact on not just your learning literacy outcomes, but your general outcomes, because it offers you a place for joy and reprieve and pleasure. So getting books into bedrooms is a really big part of what we want to do. So in 10 years' time, if we were regularly able to make sure that any child born in Broken Hill had a really solid, good supply of age-appropriate books from day one out of the womb, and they had parents and family members who were committed and understood what it meant to build in that language practice of every single day, so that they were starting off on such a solid foot. If we were able to make sure that children in all of the schools across the Far West, no matter what their means or experience, if they wanted a book, they could have a book, they could get a book. Our Pay It Forward initiative has been phenomenally encouraging in the way that people in the community have been excited to share such a tangible resource with another person, another child that they'll never meet. But to have, I think today we might have almost hit 450 books today that have been paid for, that someone has said, I will pay for this, but I want you to make it go into the hands of a child that might not have that opportunity. That is phenomenal, that people have been so responsive in not quite 18 months of us being open, and to be able to work alongside the health service, the learning support teams in our schools, or just the children that we come into contact here within Big Sky Stories, to be able to say, can I give you a book? Can I give you 5 books? Because and then can we sit down and not just, I'm just going to give you a book, but let's sit down and let's have a look at the ones we've got here, and let's talk about what kind of books you like or stories you like, and you have a look at them, you have a feel, and you choose. Because building that reader identity for children, that's what we want to encourage, that they're not just children that we do things to, but that they can see themselves as readers, as choosers of stories, as people who have something to say and to be storytellers themselves. So that choice and that ownership, that's what we want to encourage. So to have regular workshops for educators, we've already been able to do about 4 workshops for professional educators in town, but to have more and more of that, to encourage them to bring that love of literacy, but also that creative learning, whether that's through the dramatic arts or the visual arts, to bring that deep, rich literacy learning back in, to also make that a joy for them. When you are someone who works in quite an industrialized system, it can be really hard to not just fall into the grind. But we want to care for our educators, whether that be in early childhood or primary school or high school, and say, how can we create an opportunity where you remember why you love this and why you want to pass it on and you want to share it? Because we don't want tired teachers who want to just, go and leave. We want to encourage them. We want to keep them here, and we want to keep them being excited, because they will pass that on to those classrooms. So
if someone's listening and they want to donate or be a part of the Pay It Forward program?
Yes.
What do they do?
So the easiest thing to do is to find our website, www.bigskysstories.org.au. And from that website, there's a direct page on there. If you would like to donate, you can do that. We have our donations are now tax deductible. So if that's something that's helpful for you, you'll get a receipt. You can put that in your tax return and you can get that back. So that'll be great. So you can donate, but also there's a link there that will take you to our other website, which is where we can sell our books online as well. So that will take you to One More Page Book Emporium. And on that website, there's an option there. You can pay it forward even online. If you live on the other side of the world and you want to pay it forward, you choose what books you want to pay forward. Just put a little note in there. We won't post them to you. We'll make sure it goes to some little people who will really appreciate that book. You can email us through the website as well if you think you have something to share, whether you have a connection, whether you have a skill, whether you would like to come and give us your time, to volunteer. We have a huge team of volunteers, which I am deeply, deeply grateful for, because we wouldn't be where we are now without their assistance and their time and their willingness to care about what we care about at Big Sky Stories. So huge shout out and thank you to them. But if that's something you would like to do, or if you think that we could help you, or if you would like someone to have a coffee or a chat and talk about how we can support you as a family, as a carer, if you think that your kids could do with some books and you can't afford them, send me an email. Let's figure it out. So go to bigskysstories.org.au or come to 360 Argent Street. The doors are open Tuesday to Saturday. Come in, say hello, bring a coffee. Let's talk. Figure it out.
And you have got a lot to say. So
I'm very sorry. I apologize. Thank you for your willingness to listen to all of my ideas, but it's really lovely. And again, like I said, I'm just going to be the gong that keeps talking about it, and we'll see what we can do.
You keep chatting.
I will.
Jane, thank you so much for your time, for your passion, for what you've done for our community so far, and we wish you all the best. That was Jane Vaughan from Big Sky Stories, a social enterprise hoping to improve reading and literacy in the far west of New South Wales.